This is Who Makes a Podcast? Conversations with your favorite podcast hosts about who they are, the shows they make, and why they make them. I'm your host, Chris Cookley, and my guests today are Ace Bowers and Aaron Vinnik. Ace and Aaron are the hosts of Navigating Tech Life, a weekly podcast that highlights aspects of everyday life in the tech industry that you may not normally hear about. And along with telling their own stories, they also interview guests with unique experiences in the space. Ace and Aaron are veterans in tech, and their experiences include journeying through startups and IPOs, failing companies, large companies, public companies, and more. We talk about why they started their podcast, what they're hoping to get out of it, how they're using LinkedIn to promote it, how it's growing, and we'll get to all of that in just a minute. But first, if you have been thinking about starting a podcast of your own, or maybe you have recently started a podcast, I have a gift for you, and I want you to have my podcast quick start checklist. There are a ton of decisions that you need to make when you're making your first podcast, from what microphone and recording software you should use to how you host and distribute your show. It can be overwhelming, but I'm here to help. My podcast quick start checklist will walk you through all of those initial decisions to help you get started well, and I'll show you what's actually important when you're starting your podcast. To get my podcast quick start checklist, go to whomakesapodcast.com/start and tell me where to send it. It'll be in your inbox in minutes. That's whomakesapodcast.com/start. And now here is my conversation with Ace Bowers and Aaron Vinnik. So for my listeners who may not know who you are, would you guys mind identifying yourselves and then maybe telling me a little bit about, who you are and where you're from originally, and, just a little bit of the backstory?
Yeah, sure. Well, Chris, first of all, thanks for having us, man. So I will go first, I guess. My name's Ace. I live in the Silicon Valley. I've lived here my whole life, born and raised, and I've been working in the tech industry for a little over a decade, in a mix between startups, large companies, and a mix of roles too, on the engineering and product side of things, as well as the business and customer operations side of things.
And then Aaron?
I'm Aaron Vinnik. I grew up in San Francisco, lived there my whole life until last year when I moved with my wife to Colorado. I've always been into technology, and so naturally I landed in the tech space after a stint of working blue-collar jobs. I've spent over a decade in the tech industry, working in multiple sales capacities at both startups and large companies, and in both individual contributor and leadership roles. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you guys on. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. So, how did you get into tech? Ace, maybe we'll start with you. How did you get into the tech industry? What's that story look like?
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question. So before I was in tech, I was in a blue collar line of work, right? So I started out as a janitor at a motel, and then from there I became a security guard. And I was a security guard at a tech company. And that was my first time ever being inside of a tech company. And then I realized when I was in that job that you don't need to be a programmer or some coding genius to work in the tech industry. And so from there, I got an entry-level role into that tech company, the same one that I was a security guard at. And then from there, I just stayed, in my career in tech. So I think that my getting into the tech industry is a very sort of unusual scenario. It's not the common path.
Yeah, I think the idea that you need to be a coder or a developer is probably pretty prevalent when people think about technology companies.
Yeah, for sure. That was a misconception that I had, that Aaron had, and it's actually something that we've even talked about on a couple of episodes of the podcast, of our podcast.
And Aaron, you're in sales, right? Have you been in sales in the tech companies that you've worked at the entire time, or have you also jumped around to different roles?
I have been in sales my entire life, pretty much, whether it's been in tech or outside of tech. So my story is a bit different. I worked retail for a number of years, and again, like it was a role that was parallel with technology. I was selling technology. I just wasn't, working at a tech company necessarily. And then my entry into the tech space was working in an entry level sales role, and then I kind of grew from there.
So I guess you guys have both sort of worked your way up the ladder, as they say, within your respective companies. Are you at the same company, or are you at different companies?
We're at different companies. Asa and I met at a startup, and we worked together for a few years. We stayed friends after that, and been friends for a while now.
Cool. So we've said tech company a number of times now. What do you think qualifies a company to be a tech company per se? And I'll kind of let me give you a little bit of my backstory maybe, and you can see what you think about that. So I worked at a company that made web applications initially. That was my first job for the state of Tennessee. I would kind of think that might be a tech company. And then my next job was at a company that manufactured like kitchen equipment. But in my particular role, I was on a software development team. We were building an ERP system that the company ran on. So I feel like maybe it was a tech job within a possibly non-traditional tech company. So what would you say like makes a company a tech company?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think for most people, when they think of tech company, they think of like the stereotypical, Silicon Valley company making some sort of app, and there's, ping pong tables and slides and
Right.
those kinds of things, right, in the office. But honestly, I think in today's world, almost every company is a tech company in some way. And the reason I say that is because even if they're not like that traditional stereotypical tech company, chances are, they've got a website, they've got an app, they're using tech in some way for their product. And then you have like Internet of Things. So now you're, what used to be like a boring piece of hardware is now, has an app interface, and you can interact with other, machines or networks or things like that. So I think in today's world, I think that just, tech has sort of like permeated its way into so many different types of products and industries that if you like dig deep enough or like peel back the layers of the onion far enough, you would see that I think a majority of companies are tech companies. And on our podcast, we try to kind of talk about both kinds, right? Like the stereotypical tech company, as well as maybe more traditional industries who are either moving into tech or have moved into tech in some way. So, but yeah, hopefully does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. It's an interesting idea, I guess, thinking about what kind of company a company is. Do you qualify it based on the product that they make or the service they provide, or maybe how the company is ran? Because if, as you said, most companies are going to have some sort of technology team in place. Otherwise, they're not going to really be able to exist in the world at this point.
Yeah.
I think it's, just to add to that, I think it's mostly about what the company is or sells or, does, because that's where you're going to get kind of more of the traditional, tech roles that, that we encounter on the day to day. And our show's all about kind of highlighting the everyday worker that's in that space, because a lot of the times it can be a pretty volatile space, right?
Yeah. Well, especially if you're going to be looking at startups, which it sounds like you guys are. Those, in my mind at least, I've never worked for a startup, but I would imagine that those would be considered more volatile as far as companies go. Are there other industries that interest you that you might want to work in at some point, or do you think you're long haul, if I'm at a company, it's going to be a tech company of some sort?
That's a really interesting question. I would actually say that it's very possible to stay in the tech space, but work in different industries. Kind of like what we were just covering. Every company's kind of been forced to be a tech company in some way. So now you see like construction tech companies, you see supply chain, tech companies. So I think it's possible to work in lots of different industries, even though it may not be an industry you've worked in before. The sales motion and the way you go to market with the product could be quite similar to what you've done before. And so I've personally worked at companies that sold marketing products. I've worked at companies that sold like chat products, more technical API types of solutions. I think the tech world opens up, lots of doors into different industries in that regard.
Has the remote work situation that I think most people, not most people, but a lot of people have found themselves in over the last couple of years, has that affected the companies that you work at? Or has that changed things, or maybe opened doors for people to be working at different kinds of companies across the country?
I think remote work, I think it's done a lot of things very quickly. So, I can't speak for Aaron, but speaking for myself, right? So working at a tech company, a lot of tech companies, especially startups, are almost built in a way to be able to go remote quickly and easily and fairly efficiently. So it was like just with a light switch, it was like, bam, everyone's remote.
Yeah.
And there really wasn't any issue as far as running and managing a company in that sense, right? But for me personally, the change to remote work took a bit of an adjustment for me to kind of set those boundaries between work and home life. It was just a challenge because, now that, working from home, I kind of felt myself working like 24/7 because there was no physical separation between work and home life. So that was a challenge for me.
I was going to lead in the remote thing into another question that I had about where you would need to live to work in tech. And I was going to say, can you work in tech without being in California? But Aaron, you're in Colorado now, right? So is the company that you're working for based in California, or is it based in Colorado, or is it?
Yeah.
What's that relationship look like, I guess?
Yeah, the company is based in California, but it employs people around the world. And you'll notice in the tech space especially, the jobs are quite flexible. So even if a company is based out of, California or some other state, they can virtually employ people in any part of the world. And so like I would have to get it approved, obviously, but if I wanted to go work out of, I don't know, Morocco, I probably could swing that somehow.
So you guys make a podcast, Navigating Tech Life, obviously about your tech life and how you're navigating it. What is it about podcasting that drew you in? What excites you about podcasting? Why did you want to make this?
Yeah. I've been listening to podcasts for a long time. I don't know when podcasting really became as popular as it is today, but I feel like I've been listening to them for, a considerable amount of time. And I noticed that, every time I talked to Ace when we were catching up, over the phone or whatever, we were having really good conversations about, about just work and about investing and other things. And so one day I literally just texted Ace and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing a podcast?" That's literally how the show started.
If we're having these conversations anyway, maybe we should record them.
Exactly.
Have you guys done other podcasts in the past individually, or is this the first time y'all are trying this at all?
This is this is the first time for us. I mean, I've been a guest on other podcasts over the past few years. When I wrote a book, and when I was releasing the book, I went on a couple of podcasts. But as far as being a host, this is my first time. Yeah.
Yeah, same here. And I've never guested on a podcast. Actually, your podcast is the first one I've ever guested on. So.
Oh, excellent. Well, hopefully it goes okay.
Right.
So this is your first podcast, and you guys are fairly new. Obviously, I think as we're recording this, you have 9 episodes out, maybe something like that. How long have you been making it for? Did you just start in 2022?
Yeah, so we've been actually podcasting for about 3 months now, but our show launched the second week of January, and we release a new episode every week.
How did you decide on that every week schedule?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. Yeah, I think that I don't know, Aaron. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it was like a conscious decision where we said, okay, we're going to do it once a week. Like this is
Yeah.
how it must be, and our podcasts are going to be 1 hour long. I think it was more like, hey, 1 week feels like a good cadence, right? It's not too often. It's not too few and far between. So I think that's kind of like, I think it just felt natural 1 week.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, and we wanted to be consistent with it. So, we wanted to, for our listeners or future listeners to know that every whatever, we decided on Wednesday as the day. So every Wednesday, they'd be able to hear something new from us. And so that's kind of what we rolled with. And it's actually been working out pretty well in terms of like the workload and stuff like that.
Yeah, and my episodes are once every other week, and it mostly because of workload. So, like, how much work is it for you to put an episode together? Like, what are you doing as far as your production? What's that look like?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. So, first of all, we plan out our episodes and we keep timelines visible through a Trello board. So that way we just always know what we're going to be working on.
Okay.
And every few weeks we just have like a hour-long session to kind of figure out what we want to talk about in future episodes. And a lot of that inspiration comes from, maybe listeners are requesting something specifically, or it could just be we recently had a thought or experienced something in our own, jobs, and we, decided that it could be a good topic to cover. And so that's kind of the content planning side. Tactically, for recording the episodes, we use Riverside to record those, and any other content that gets added to our show is also recorded in Riverside. So intros and outros, announcements, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And we actually record audio and video because we actually use the video to post highlights from our show on YouTube.
Okay.
Just kind of a thing that we found, could be a good thing to use in the long run. Once the episode's been recorded, we use a tool called Descript for editing and cleanup.
Yep.
And that's where we also put together the videos and the audiograms for our show. And then the final product is uploaded to our host, which we use Buzzsprout for. And they distribute the show into all the major platforms.
And Descript, that's the one that you can upload the audio file and it gives you like a transcript of it, right? And then you're editing it by like almost like you would edit a Word document. Do I have that right?
Exactly. That's exactly how it works. And it helped us a lot because neither Ace nor I have any experience in terms of audio or in terms of editing content or any of that stuff. So Descript has been kind of a lifesaver in terms of that.
Do you feel like they do a pretty good job as far like if you're going to cut out a word or anything? Do you think that they do a good job of making that transition sound natural?
I think so, and I'm sure there are tons of things you can do in addition to what they automatically do.
Yep.
I don't do it for our show, and I've gotten feedback for the show that that the quality is great and they love kind of how everything flows, and so I haven't heard any negatives yet in terms of the the sound quality or anything like that.
Do you guys have any sort of like pre-podcasting routine that you go through, like getting yourselves warmed up? Or I think you just had a guest on your most recent episode, right? So did you do anything to get your guest warmed up, or what does that look like? Or do you just hop on like it's go time, we're just going to start talking?
Aaron, I guess I can take that one. So whenever we have guests on, we try to do like a little pre-meeting with them beforehand. Maybe a couple days or a week, just so, we get a chance to see each other and hear each other and talk to each other before the actual episode. I feel that sort of does a good job of making them at least feel more comfortable, like they're not now suddenly answering all these questions to a stranger.
Sure.
So we that's one of the things we do when we have guests. Yeah, I mean, other than that, Aaron, is there anything that really jumps out at you that is sort of our show routine, or do you have any sort of pre-show routine that I'm not aware of?
Actually, Ace, there is probably something you're not aware of. So usually before we dive into recording a show, I try to make it a point to have a conversation with someone, like on the phone or like with my wife before before I sit down at the desk and actually start recording our show. Because I've felt like that I need to warm up my vocals a little bit beforehand. So I don't know if you knew that I do that, but now you do.
Yeah, I was not aware of that.
So you have a pre-conversation before your conversation.
Yeah.
Nice. What do you guys use as far as like the equipment that you're recording with? What's your technical setup? What kind of microphones do you have? What's it running into? I guess it's just plugging into your computer because you're using Riverside, but what kind of mics are you on?
Yeah, I can get into my setup. Mic wise, it's a Blue Yeti X, and it's sitting on a Blue Radius 3 suspension mount. And that's all hooked up to my Blue Compass boom arm. So it's all just
You're
blue,
in the blue universe.
branded stuff. I guess so. Yeah. I don't even know why I went that route, but I did. And then
They sell a bundle that had it all, maybe?
not even, but we'll go with that. Headphones wise, I'm on Bear Dynamic DT770s,
Okay.
and they're hooked up to a USB DAC. I think it's called Origin. I don't know. I found it on Amazon. And webcam wise, it's a Logitech Brio 4K webcam, and all that's hooked up to my MacBook.
You live in that dongle life with the MacBook?
Oh yeah, if I show you the behind my monitor what's going on, you'll probably have a heart attack.
For my headphones, mic, and webcam, it's the same as Aaron's. I just don't have all of the fancy, connectors and microphone arm and all that good stuff.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I used to have a Blue Yeti. I liked it. It worked out well as a USB mic goes.
Yeah, I had it before even the podcasting days, and never thought to switch it out with something else. Although if we get a nice deal from Spotify or something, I'll maybe upgrade to a Shure or something.
Yeah. Do you guys listen to a lot of podcasts? Do you have time for that?
I do try to listen to podcasts. I listened to a lot more when I was still making the commute into the office for work.
Yeah, I've lost a lot of podcast time from that.
Yeah.
Losing the commute.
Totally. So, I guess that's probably my best answer is I used to listen to a lot more when I was making the commute. Now I'm listening to less, but I still try to listen to them because I really appreciate podcasting just as a medium. And so I, as someone who's now a podcaster,
right.
I want to listen to more and support those shows that I do like because I realize how much work goes into actually creating just one episode. So
what about you, Aaron? Do you listen to a lot of podcasts?
Like you guys, I used to just because I had, more in between time. But actually I found, now that we're working on our own show, how much time is spent. I mean, it's basically another full-time job. Mm-hmm. So that time is, even more diminished since then. But I still, so I listen to the one I try to devote the most of my time to is Bigger Pockets. It's a real estate podcast. Just because, I like to keep up with what the current trends are in real estate investing. So I try to still stay true to that show. And I do listen to a couple other smaller shows that, friends host themselves.
Okay.
Just to kind of give my support. But it's really just like a handful or less that I have time to listen to regularly.
What are some of those the smaller shows that you listen to?
I'll point one out. It's called Uncharted. And it's a friend of mine who, I worked with in the past, and it's another kind of business type of podcast.
Cool. Ace, do you have any particular shows that you enjoy listening to every week or every other week?
Yeah, I think there's really, now that my time has dwindled down, there's about 3 that I try to consistently listen to if I can. So one of them, you mentioned Dave Ramsey, Chris, earlier.
Yeah.
So I like watching and listening to his podcast, and he puts stuff on YouTube that I watch sometimes as well. The other one Aaron mentioned was Bigger Pockets. I'm also very into real estate investing, so that's another one. And then the third one is, it really has nothing to do with business or money or investing or tech or anything, but it's called Lore.
Lore, yeah. Aaron Mahnke.
Yes, yeah. So you're familiar, dude.
Yeah.
I love that podcast. I've
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've listened to
He's
it
got the creepy piano music behind everything. It sounds so good. He's
I
got
know.
a very particular way that he talks too. I'm
He does.
Aaron
He
Mahnke. This.
Oh, hey, that's a
Lore.
good impression, man.
Do you guys have any shows or any hosts maybe that you look up to or try to emulate in any way when you're making your podcast? Or have you thought about that at all?
I'll jump in on this one. Not really, and I'll tell you why. I think I think copying is a cool thing, just because like there's always someone to look up to. But I also feel like we've just tried to do our own thing in our own way.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are a couple like resources that I look at just for learning more about good approaches to things. But in terms of actually trying to imitate another host or someone else, I kind of try to stay away from that. I don't know if you feel differently, Ace.
Well, no, I feel 100% the same. And the one thing that I actually like consciously try to do when we're recording an episode or talking to a guest is I always just try to make it like I'm talking to a friend. And so in that sense, I just try to be like my authentic self in those. And so that wouldn't work if I was, I think, trying to
imitate Aaron Mahnke.
Exactly. So, yeah.
What about learning how to make a podcast? Are there any books you've read or anything that you've watched on YouTube or anything that has influenced how you're making your show?
Absolutely. So actually one thing that we did early on was we just did like a Q&A with an industry expert that we found. And that was actually super helpful in the planning of our show, just kind of how to get listed and how to submit a trailer so that your stuff, is submitted and stuff like that. But on the regular, I would say like the podcast host is one that, we read from quite often. Buzzsprout releases a lot of good content and guides. And then
is the podcast host a website?
Yeah, I think it's the podcasthost.com. And the founder, Colin Gray, also has written a book, and I've read that book as well, about podcasting. How
did you find that industry expert to have that Q&A with?
Ace, how did we find her?
Oh, we used I don't remember the exact site. It might have been like a freelancer, one of those freelancer websites we used.
Okay.
And that was great. I mean, she was super, super helpful because, going into that, Aaron and I were basically like, hey, we know we want to start a podcast, but like, where do we start, right? There's got to be some groundwork that you have to do ahead of time. And so she was really, really great at sort of getting us set on the right path for that. So
that was just like podcast consultation maybe that she was offering on that site.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what it was. It was like a podcast, podcast consulting or something, a variation of those keywords.
How do you guys decide on the topics that you want to cover? I know you have a Trello board that you're using for kind of keeping track of what you're going to do, but do you have any criteria for deciding on a topic, or is it just, I think this will be cool and I want to talk about it, and so I'm going to throw it on the board?
Yeah, I think... So usually in each episode, there's a common theme, but multiple topics. And so one thing that we typically decide when we have like a brainstorming session is, do we think we can say enough about this particular thing in order for it to be its own episode? And if the answer is no, then we might actually add that in to be the topic, a subtopic of another episode, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we actually started out with just him, Ace and I going back and forth on certain topics. But, as of this week, actually, we started launching or airing our guest episodes. And that's added like a ton of inspiration for topics that we can cover in the future in more detail too.
Do you use any notes while you're recording? Do you guys spend some time like outlining what you want to talk about in any kind of a detail? How do you stay on track while you're making your episodes?
Yeah, we try to have, some sort of a, architecture or an outline, if you will. We don't really script out the exactly what we're saying.
Sure.
So it's pretty sort of just kind of, in the moment. But yeah, we do try to have like an outline to keep the show, flowing as it should.
What do you see for like the future of your podcast? What are you hoping for? Do you like your current format? I know you're just starting to bring guests on, which is a cool addition to you guys having conversations with yourselves. Are there any other ways that you're thinking about changing it? Or are you going to kind of ride with what you have for now and see where it goes?
Yeah, I think we're riding with the way we're going right now, and really the goal of our show has always been to inspire and teach someone something from each episode, and I think we're holding true to that. And we do get feedback pretty often that folks are learning from our experiences and from the guests that we talk to and stuff like that. And so I think as long as we continue to do that, we feel like we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah. What would you say success looks like for your podcast, if you had to define that? As startup people, you mentioned Spotify earlier. Are you hoping for an exit at some point? Are you hoping you get acquired? Is that the goal?
That's a great question. And to be honest, I've never even thought about it really.
Okay.
And Aaron, you might have a different answer than me, but for when, Aaron and I decided to do this podcast, for me, it's always been about, like Aaron mentioned earlier, like, is there someone who can learn something from our podcast and our episodes? And it's always just sort of, for me at least, been about that and been about highlighting the stories of the everyday tech worker. And I think that, that's kind of really what has been most important to me. So, if there is some sort of, in startup terms, an exit down the road, then, so be it. But if not, that's totally fine, because that's not what I started this journey for.
Yeah, I'm in alignment with that. When we were thinking about what the show would be, we really assessed like what podcasts are out there, and all of them usually highlight famous people and people who are like mega successful, right? But you never really get to hear the stories of the folks that contributed to that single person's success and all the stuff that happened in between. And so that's kind of what our goal with the show is. And I think there's always going to be a story to tell that someone hasn't heard, because that certain person doesn't have a voice to tell that story. So we want to be kind of the platform for those people.
I often say that we are like the Mike Rowe, the Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe of the tech industry.
Yeah. I reached out to Mike Rowe to see if he would come on. He hasn't said yes yet.
No reply yet, huh? We'll keep trying, man.
No. Well, actually, I did get a reply from his assistant, and it was a no for now. But,
man.
Someday maybe.
It'll happen.
How are you driving growth to your podcast? Like, are you doing anything in specifically, or are you just kind of hoping organic growth takes it somewhere?
Well, really two things. So we haven't done any sort of like, paid advertising or anything like that. We've been leveraging our own social networks. And one of those big ones, I think just is a natural fit for what our podcast is LinkedIn. Yeah. I think that's, one tool that we're leveraging a lot, and a lot of our listeners live on LinkedIn, and a lot of our potential future guests also live on LinkedIn. So that's been I think a big one for us up until this point, at least.
Yeah, that's like a social media network that is built specifically for somebody looking for the information that you guys are making or providing, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great spot. So you're posting, I guess, on LinkedIn. Are you posting full episodes or links to it, or are you posting those little clips that you're making?
We heavily utilize audiograms. So for every episode, we post an audiogram as kind of a sneak peek to the episode. And then we obviously post a link to the full episode with every post. And then, with guests, we're obviously encouraging them to, share those same videos in their own networks. And we're also trying to drive listeners to the show with our YouTube clips. So the YouTube clips don't show the full episode. It kind of shows a few, we call them key takeaways. They're basically highlights from each episode. But the call to action there is to go, and listen to the full episode.
I'm not familiar with what an audiogram is. What is that?
Yeah, an audiogram is a visual soundbite of some kind of audio recording. So even if you're not recording in video, you can create a video of your, episode or show, whatever you're saying, and make that kind of come to life and look like a video.
Is that a piece of software or an app or is a website? Where are you doing that?
There's a lot of platforms that let you create them.
Okay.
The most popular one, I think, is called Headliner. But Descript also has a feature for that. Buzzsprout has a feature for that as well. So there's a lot of platforms that are adopting these audiograms.
I see. So audiogram is just a general term describing that type of piece of content. It's not necessarily a company or service that you would be using, like Instagram.
Yeah, right.
I think that I've heard on your podcast that you've mentioned seasons, right? Are you guys doing seasons, or are you just doing like an episode every week forever?
Yeah, we're just doing the episode numberings.
Okay.
We originally thought we were going to do seasons, but I've heard stories of podcasts, doing the episode thing and then eventually turning those into seasons, backtracking.
Yep.
So I'm not sure if we'll do that in the future, but for now, I think it makes sense to stay in, more of an episodic format.
Yeah, that's what mine is at the moment too. I'm just doing episodes. Somebody that I've interviewed in the past said that they started out doing that and then they switched to seasons when they reached a point that they wanted a break. Like, I'm going to take a month off and not do any podcasts.
Right.
So I'm going to say this is the end of season 1 and season 2 will be back next month. Do you guys monetize your podcast at this point? Or are you just trying to build an audience?
Yeah, we're not monetizing. Kind of as I mentioned in one of the earlier questions, when we started this, it wasn't about that. And it's still, it's not about that, at least for me. So we really haven't made that decision to monetize yet. And again, if we do in the future, so be it. But as for right now, it's just not about that. I think for us,
not a focus right now.
Do you have any access to listener stats at all? I'm sure Buzzsprout has some stuff, and I'm curious if you use them at all when you're determining what kind of topics that you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we do have access to some stats like app data, device data, location, stuff like that. To this point, we don't really evaluate them in depth, but we do think, or I think at least, they'll be valuable in the future.
Yeah.
When we look at finding an advertising demographic or looking at different sponsorship channels and stuff like that, I think analyzing the data at that point would be super useful.
I mean, you're a new show, I'm a new show. I imagine that, as it goes with data, the less data you have, the less useful it is as you're trying to analyze it and make decisions based off of it. So I'm sure as you grow, you'll get more insightful pieces of information from that.
Yeah,
totally.
Did you find starting your podcast to be difficult at all?
Good question. I think that the general answer to that question for most people would probably be yes, I would think. But because we did a consultation with that podcasting consultant, I think that really, really helped us out. I think that if we hadn't had that consultation, we would have made a lot of mistakes and errors that would have really sort of tarnished making a good first impression on launch.
All right, so that's an interesting point. Launching. Did you think about that at all? Did you just put one episode up and then the next week you put another episode up? I've heard, people say you should launch with 3 episodes, one after another, like 3 days in a row or something to hit some algorithm. I didn't do that. I didn't have enough episodes in the bank to do that.
Yeah, we decided to launch with 1 episode.
Yep.
And I'm not sure if I don't know the stats behind like doing that versus launching with a few episodes, but we did pre-record a number of episodes so that, with the launch, we'd be ready to have, other episodes available for the following weeks. And that actually helped us out, and it created a kind of a buffer
Right.
in our production so that we had some time to focus on, promoting the podcast instead of like, scrambling to figure out what we're doing next week,
Make another one. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many episodes in advance do you have ready, like just in the bank, ready to go?
It's kind of random, but I think we try to keep a 3 to 4 week buffer if we can.
Cool. You use Descript to edit your episodes, right? So do you do a lot of editing on your episodes? What does that process look like? Is it just Descript that you're using for that, and then they spit out the final file?
Yeah, so all the editing is done in Descript. And for the most part, it's not a horrible amount of work. Really just it usually takes like 3/4 of the length of the episode, I'd say, to do the editing process itself. So I've looked at like the average time it takes for a podcast to be edited, and I've seen like metrics that are much more than that, you know, like double the length of the episode, triple the length of it. So I think Descript has saved us a lot of time in that process.
Yeah, I could see that being super helpful. As somebody who does not use Descript to edit the episodes, it does take a number of hours. Like this 1 hour or so interview will probably take me at least 2, maybe 3 hours to edit down.
Wow. Just a thought while we're on that. Asa and I think, both run in the same mindset in terms of like optimizing for efficiency in everything we do.
Yeah.
So we've taken that to the extreme with the podcast. We try to kind of, optimize and automate whatever we can. And so, Descript, while it is like an investment, it's probably been the best investment for us in the production process.
To that point, do you do everything, or do you have a team? Like, could you bring a virtual assistant on to do your descripting? Would you trust somebody to do that? And then, you just record it and send it off, and somebody else handles it all.
I'd love to, but actually right now I feel really good about doing the work, ourselves, and in terms of everything that we do. Just because it keeps us really close to everything. I think at some point, if we're, really growing and taking off and we have to focus on other areas, I'm sure that we'll hire, someone to do social media and someone to do the editing and stuff like that. But for now, Ace, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we've got a pretty good handle on everything.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%.
Do you guys batch your episodes at all? Do you record more than one at a time, or when you're sitting down to record, it's just the one episode?
That's a good question. I think for the most part, we're doing one at a time, especially now that we're starting to interview guests. I can't think, Aaron, I don't recall a time that we recorded more than one episode in one, sort of sitting session. So, yeah, I think the main answer would be it's just, one at a time. And we really focus on that topic at that time or that guest at that time.
All right, so I'm going to ask each of you this. What would you say is one of the most important lessons that you've learned about podcasting since you started?
So on my side, I've learned that setting up a process is incredibly crucial. So in the very beginning, we did everything kind of in an ad hoc fashion. Like, we would just throw random things together, and it kind of worked. But I think we quickly figured out that every aspect of the show, like from recording to signing waivers with guests to planning out episode releases and all the content that goes with a release, all of that really needed to be documented, and a process needed to be made, so that we'd stay organized, and Ace and I would know what each of us would need to do, right, on a regular basis. And so, if there's one thing I'd recommend to any podcaster out there, it would be to really take the time to build out a workflow and figure out who should be doing what, if you have multiple people involved, and take the time to get organized, because you'll definitely thank yourself later.
I want to ask you that same question, Ace, but real quick before we get there, what kind of waiver are you having your guests sign?
We just have a simple waiver that says, that the guest agrees that we can use their content in multiple forms. So whether that's the podcast or for an audiogram or for, a social media post, whatever that might be,
Interesting.
in perpetuity. So, one of the things that helps is, in the future, if we want to re-highlight an older interview, we still have the ability to use that content without, with that person's permission.
Yeah, I wonder how common that is. That's the first time I've heard of somebody doing that. I mean, it makes sense from a business perspective. Just haven't run across that before.
I think with that aspect, I think just, Aaron is, like you said, he's been in business and sales his entire career. So I think that he just naturally wears that hat of sort of thinking ahead when it comes to business decisions.
All right. So, Ace, then what is one of the most important lessons that you've learned about podcasting since you started?
Yes, good question. So it's a lot more work than I originally anticipated. And so I learned that pretty quickly. I'm really grateful to have Aaron as the co-host, and he's just, he's super organized, which I really, really appreciate. And so that's helped a lot. I think, other than that, being organized is a main thing. The other thing is to sort of think ahead a little bit. And when I say that, I mean, Aaron and I will have a conversation about, okay, well, here, this is episode 3. Let's do this as episode 4 because the way we finished episode 3 makes a great segue into the topic for episode 4, right?
Right.
And so
Sure.
the thinking ahead, I think, is something that I learned that's pretty important because, we are putting out in each episode, it's a piece of creative content, right? And so the listener is consuming that content, and we want to do that in a way that's going to be the best experience possible for the listener.
I think that's great advice. Is there anything else that you guys want to talk about? Did we miss anything that you wanted to cover?
No, I think this has been great. Thanks for the great questions.
Yeah. Where can people find you? Where do you want to send people?
Yeah, you can find our show on all of the podcasting platforms out there. It's called Navigating Tech Life, and on our website, ntlcast.com. And if any of your listeners want to connect on LinkedIn, you can find us on our LinkedIn page by also searching Navigating Tech Life.
Great. Aaron, Ace, thank you guys so much for hopping on with me. I really appreciate it. This has been really insightful, and I had a good time. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. This was great.
Thanks for having us.
That was my conversation with Ace Bowers and Aaron Vinnik, tech veterans and hosts of the Navigating Tech Life podcast, which can be found on all of the major podcast networks. You can also find Ace and Aaron at ntlcast.com, on Instagram at Navigating Tech Life, and on Facebook at Navigating Tech Life. My name is Chris Cookley, and you can find me at whomakesapodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, it would be an enormous help if you shared it with your friends or left a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. It really does make a difference. And if you host a podcast and would like to be my next guest on Who Makes a Podcast, please let me know. Go to whomakesapodcast.com/guest and tell me about your show. This is Who Makes a Podcast. I'll be back next time with another conversation with another incredible podcast host. Thanks for listening.